people need ways to do the things that are hard, but that still matter, especially when someone's grieving. People are scared to do it wrong. They're afraid to make missteps. And so sometimes I do nothing. And that was the worst part when I lost my mom or when she was sick, is the distance I felt by people doing nothing. And I looked back and realized they just didn't know how to show up. So that's where it started. I thought, how can I help the people who have the heart and need the how?
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the legendary entrepreneur and community impact maker. With over 20 years in working in nonprofits, Tiffany Wachtler has now started her own company, creating kindness through the Kindness Concierge, a company that aims to make sure that those who are grieving and celebrating feel loved and less alone. Please welcome the legend, Tiffany Wachtler.
Thank you so much. That was a great intro. I appreciate you.
Great to be here with you, and let's get started quickly. You have your own company, you're working in nonprofit, and you're finishing your degree. Where do you build us the connections there? How are you doing all those things at one time?
We were just talking about routine.
That's a very good question. I think I've always gone at a pretty fast pace when it's something I love. So the nonprofit work pays the bills in the big sense. I always wanted to make sure if I had a job, it had to matter. It had to be doing something that was for the greater good.
Talk to us a little bit about the nonprofit.
So I worked in the nonprofit sector for about 20 years and with a lot of different orgs. And I'm most excited right now. I am at Special Olympics Colorado, and I help them produce their fundraising events, some of their big signature events, so that they can promote inclusivity and help the community of people living with intellectual disabilities. So it's a great way to actually be able to use a lot of my skills and talent and create those moments where people can see, how can you show up? Like, the best thing about nonprofits is that you can see just individuals and ordinary people doing extraordinary things and building community every single day.
You also talked about being an event person. What are some key things to throwing a successful event?
Life is in the details. I think that is the big thing, is that you go to an event and it's phenomenal. They make it look easy, that there was not all these levers moving behind the curtain. So I think if you're going to throw a great event, first think about the details. And when I do anything and most of my work, what do I want people to know and what do I want people to feel? So anytime I produce an event, I'm like, what do we want them to know and what do we want them to feel? And then build the layers so that those things happen. And just always think about the participant experience.
I appreciate that. That being said, I would love to know what community means to you, because you're building events, Kindness Concierge. What does community mean?
That's a great question. I think that's very layered for me. I think community is about building the network of support around you and being willing to pour yourself into reciprocating it. I think community is about building together and feeling less alone. And I think I find that in lots of different areas of my life. And I think not so much when we're celebrating. I think it's easy to build community in moments of height and excitement. I think it's harder to build it when there's something at risk. I feel like in this time that we're living in, we want to have connection, which is what community means. But there's a risk in being who you are and being vulnerable in our society where you may not be accepted for that. The community may not be welcoming you. So for me, I feel like creating space where everyone has a place and you matter, but making sure you're taking on the responsibility that we can't just carry you, you also have to carry us. One thing that's been beautiful in my life is always finding the light. So I feel like people are looking for, where is their light? Where is their joy? Because it's happening all the time. It may not make the news, but people are doing incredible things all the time. So I think that's where the hunger for community is like we want to see some joy and light and see the kindness and good in people. And sometimes that only turns up in tragedy. It only turns up when something catastrophic happens. We decide to rally as a community or rally as a culture, rally as a country. And as soon as that kind of settles, we go back to being our own ways. So I think my hope is that we'll just weave a little more kindness and keep it consistent. Like, show up all the time in small ways. Don't wait for the tragedy. And in my case, it was death, or people started to show up, or my mom's sickness. But like, don't wait for those moments. Notice people, see people. And really, I think it's important to not believe that the world is a tragic place, because there's joy and love happening in it all the time.
Well, your company, Kindness Concierge, brings that joy and love to people. And you talked about the experience with losing your mother kind of being a catalyst, but let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
You're working full time and you say, I want to start a business.
Is that what I said?
Yeah. Well, clearly, right? Or
Right?
what did you say?
Yeah.
What did you say that led to the creation of Kindness Concierge?
It started as just like a noodling on a book for right after my mom died, and she died in 2017. And then at the beginning of last year, I thought there must be a better way to do this. And it started with a friend asking me if I could send her family's holiday cards out, because I love a good photo holiday card. I send it the day after Thanksgiving. I want to be the first one in the mailbox. I'm really, really competitive about it. And she's like, I don't understand how you get this done every year with all the other things on your plate. Can you just do it for me? And I said, absolutely not. I don't have any desire to do that for you and your family. But it sparked something like, ooh, what do I have that I could do that other people think is hard or tedious? And I thought, oh, I can show them how to show up for people who are grieving. And so that's how it started. It was like, how can I make this book a service? Because people need ways to do the things that are hard, but that still matter, especially when someone's grieving. People are scared to do it wrong. They're afraid to make missteps. And so sometimes I do nothing. And that was the worst part when I lost my mom or when she was sick, is the distance I felt by people doing nothing. And I looked back and realized they just didn't know how to show up. So that's where it started. I thought, how can I help the people who have the heart and need the how? So that's where it started.
It's a gift box, but it's not just that. I mean, the responses I got from people who received these boxes were some of the best responses I've ever received from an action I've done. And it wasn't that I gave them a gift, it was how it was received. How do you create a gift box that conveys the love and compassion and community that someone has when someone else is going through a tough time or celebrating a good time?
So I do two things. One, I do care packages that I already have curated that are kind of like a hug in a box. That's an easy way to get that. Like, I want to send this to someone. Where people get stuck is on the card. So I help them customize the message. You know, exactly what do you want to convey? And then I give them options so they don't feel stuck with, I don't know what to say. So let's figure out the words that are meaningful to you. So that's one kind of arm of what I do. And the other one's more like what you're talking about, where I kind of do these kind consultations and listen to what's going on. What's your relationship to this person? And what can we do? Because sometimes it's sending something and it's finding a curated gift that someone else has already created. I do that often. Or it's saying, let me build a box based on what you all think would be meaningful to this person. Sometimes it's not a thing, it's an action. Because there are times, like I was working with someone and her friend had just gone into hospice. And she really wanted to be there for her and do something. We were like, this is maybe not the time in her life to send something. And so we thought, like, do we send comfortable pajamas? Like, is she eating? Could we send food or not? And kind of going back and forth. And we decided the gift was time. And so she decided to go and visit her and spend time with her and her family at this last stage of her life. Mm-hmm. So I try and look at, like, what's your budget? What's meaningful? What matters to that person? And what honors them? Another person I had recently was similar situation. This person wasn't receiving guests. They weren't wanting to see anyone other than their really close family. And she said, I feel so grounded when I'm outside. The person she was trying to support. She's like, I just sit in the grass. I enjoy the sun. I just feel like connected to kind of the earth. And so we decided, send her a wind chime and let her know every time she hears this chime that you are thinking of her and that she is loved. Mm. And this wind chime can then stay with her family. And this can continue to be thoughts about her in this very meaningful way. And it honors that she didn't want visitors. So I think there's just something about how can you show up that makes sense for your situation, makes sense for your budget, your time, whatever you have. And then if people can't send it themselves, then I execute it for them because I don't want it to get stuck there like, oh, that's a great idea and I'm still not going to do it. So sometimes I actually will elevate the service and send it on their behalf.
Do you do that for companies? Obviously, you did it for Ryan in terms of, you know, just like a thank you gift, but like a follow-up gift of like, hey, here's a book and here's a note. How do you think about that just in terms of your business? Okay, you had a new client that you've done well with. Do you send them gifts? What does that look like?
What do I do for them?
Yeah.
Yes. There's a big opportunity, I think, with companies, both for helping their bereaved employees and how do you show up for them. So one lady, the HR lady or whoever, the person at your job has to send the flowers and circulate the card. I think there's a real partnership opportunity to help make that show up gift more meaningful. Mm-hmm. So that's an opportunity I feel like I would like to have with companies. And also, I think there is room to do those celebratory things. And I think I'm just about a special touch. My husband says, you are in the business of bad news. And I was like, no, I'm not. And I was like, in Ryan's case, it was celebratory. This is a way to show appreciation. I was like, I'm in the spirit of kindness. And how do you make those thoughtful touches? And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for that for companies that are wanting to say thank you. So I'm always open to it, but I lean into the hard because that's where people are uncomfortable. That's where people struggle. What's your empathy policy at work? Because if you have a bereavement policy, it's probably 3 to 5 days at best. The average in the U.S. is 3 days. There's no way I could have come back to work and been highly functioning 3 days after losing my mom. And so what can you do as a company to make sure the work gets done, but that you're showing up for your employees? And if your place is a place of inclusion, it needs to be including grievers as well. There might need to be some room for someone to be off camera or not go to the company happy hour. I had my old boss tell me 3 times, I think in one day, like, don't forget to call your mom for Mother's Day one year. And I was like, Rah! I was like, well, I can't call my mom because she's dead, frankly. And she knew this and she felt terrible. But I don't say that to talk down to her. I say it's about an awareness that in your space, people might be going through things. And how do we create a space where they can do that and feel safe and comfortable, or feel completely distracted with work so they don't have to think about all the nonsense and chaos that's coming with the hard times. So I feel like there's a lot of room for companies to do better and build some empathy policies.
She knew about the loss, correct?
She did.
How would you, if you're in her position, cover, if in your leadership position or if you were in that leadership position, to make sure that everybody is included in that?
So I think just being a little thoughtful of who these general experiences, how they might hit folks. There's no perfect way to do it. I think the best thing you can do is what she did, which was she corrected the misstep. She's like, I am so sorry. And she's like, I know how meaningful your mom is to you. And she's like, I'm really sorry. I just want to make sure that I love being a mom and I'm celebrating this time, but I also want to recognize the misstep.
One of your superpowers, and you've kind of done this with talking about briefly your mother, losing your mother, and talking about that boss, you give people the ability to see and understand, hey, grief is a part of everyday life for some people at your company, some people in your life. How do people in grief move forward? How did you do that in a meaningful way?
Right, that's a trick question because move forward is hard to describe. So I think the first thing as someone who's supporting people who are grieving is that grief is not something to fix or cure. The best thing you can do is give people space to feel however they're feeling for as long as they're feeling it and be okay in that uncomfortable space. Also, I think that people feel like you need space to grieve, and they give you that by staying away. And sometimes you need people actually to be in it with you. And some people gave me a lot of space, and like I said, it felt like distance, or they trusted other people were taking care of me. So I think the best thing you can do is show up in the immediacy of it and acknowledge it in a way that feels true to who you are. So maybe that's a text, maybe that's a phone call, maybe it's a card, whatever feels good to like how you operate. And then just recognize that initially people swarm and they're all there. What's really hard in grief is when everyone returns to and resends to their everyday lives and you feel alone. You're still dealing with this every single day. So when people say, well, I didn't want to remind you of your mom's death, I'm like, nope, I think about it every day. You can never remind me of it. So I love saying my mom's name. I love talking about her. And I think feeling okay doing that. So what I do, one of the things I do every single time, if I can remember in the moment, which is most of the time, if someone says, I lost my brother, I lost my mom, whoever died, I say, what is their name? What's your sister's name? What's your friend's name? And I always do it in the present tense because that person's still very real to them. And I want to know who they were as a person. And so like that's one tiny thing I always try and do is like, what was your mom's name? And I think that's a way of just acknowledging that this is still something you're going through. And I think always trying to remember like 2 years down the road, they're still going through it. I'm 7 years now. We don't get over grief. We learn how to work around it. Like it just takes up some space. I've seen a really great photo of a bookshelf and it's like grief. And then you start to see grief as a book and then other books start to fill in around it. But the book's always on the shelf. That's how I like to think about it.
What is your mother's name?
Michelle. And when she was married, my dad's name's Estelle, so she thought she was very cool because her name was Michelle L. Estelle.
Nice. And what would Michelle say about the Kindness Concierge and what you've built?
I think she would be proud. My mom always had a sense of like, there's always someone you can help. In her case, I think it was less fortunate, she would think, and that's how I think the charitable side of myself came to be. But also she's like, politeness doesn't cost you anything. Like, it doesn't cost you anything to be kind, so you don't have a choice because it's not costing you anything.
Well, Tiffany, you're an inspiration to us, and we really appreciate you coming on and talking about your journey and everything that you have built and the things and your perspective around community, your perspective around grief, your perspective around people being together, doing incredible things together. And your mom would be, I know she's proud.
Thank you.
Well, Tiffany Wachtler, the Kindness Concierge. Visit thekindnessconcierge.com. Also, learn more about the amazing human being that's spreading kindness and love in this world. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you
Thank
both.
you.
It was my pleasure.
Awesome.